I would like to welcome to the stage Ricardo Lafosse from Kraft Heinz, and following Ms. Gary Hayslip from Halcyon, and Dr. Chenxi Wang from Rain Capital, and Lance James from Unit 221B. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Ooh. So let's start today by asking the first question, which is, over all the years that you've worked in cybersecurity, what's been the biggest shift that you've seen? You know, the thing that really reshaped your thinking the most, and when you realize the game has fundamentally changed?
I'm happy to start out.
Yeah?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me was, in my first couple of roles as a CISO, I was all focused on, it was all technical. It was all engineering, you know, you're building stuff. And, okay, that's pretty bad. I think the biggest shift for me was the more I started managing larger teams and working with, you know, organizations, the more I started realizing this is really a business role. This is really about strategy. And I started realizing, you know, these users that my teams were angry with and stuff like that, these were really our customers. And, you know, and so it was changing it to looking at it from a business perspective and looking at services that we were providing that, doing that, I found the executive team was actually more accepting and willing to go ahead and work with me more, and I was able to get things done. You know, and so it was just a total shift, you know, for me. And then, you know, I've had multiple roles since then where I've just looked at it as I'm just a business executive that just manages risk using technology and people and frameworks and policy and stuff like that.
I would agree with that. And adding on to it, I've been doing board works, right, from a security practitioner's past to board of directors, looking at rising from, you know, technology executives to risk executives to governance. I think at the governance level, cybersecurity expertise is sorely needed today. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say overall CISOs have a really hard time communicating risk, not just to end users, to the board. It's still a very technical role, or traditionally has been a technical role, where I think CFO, CEO, even COOs have a longer history of being able to communicate business to others. And now the CISO role is slowly getting there, but I think we still need to mature to be able to talk the business to get the respect we need at the table.
Yeah, and Lance, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, it's slightly a little bit off the rabbit hole because I'm not working from the CISO perspective except for protecting the CISO's interests. More from a threat perspective, one of the biggest changes that I saw was when we have the COM, which is a bunch of teenagers, and Russia was working with them on a ransomware piece. And what's happened now is we have nation state enabling teenagers with the same skill set. So now you have chaos meets organized and persistent type threats. And that combination is something that kind of made us have to shift, at least from my perspective as well, including protecting the interest of the office of the CISO as well. So.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's really interesting to see sort of vigilantism take off ever since we've seen, you know, all this conflict.
Yep.
So going back, you know, to the earliest appearance you made at Black Hat MEA, what conversations were there that defined that moment, and how do they feel different today? Like the first time you were here versus now?
Yeah, I'd say I was here for the first one, the @hack, 2021, 2022. Remember, that's where I first met you.
Yeah.
I think what really surprised me was the excitement over the CTF, the Arsenal Hall. There was just so many students, so many people really excited to participate, especially those that have never done a CTF. So it was that community feel. And what I say for today, I just see a lot more excitement. Again, I love the enthusiasm, the education, and the big push that Black Hat MEA does for students and the aspiring CISOs of tomorrow.
Yeah, I want to add that I was here 2 years ago, and I was at the CTF hall, and I saw the percentage of women that were participating in CTF. That was surprising, because in the US, you see the CTF at Black Hat, about 10% women. Here you see like 40%, 30% women. So kudos to the kingdom. You guys are doing a great job.
I'll add on to that. I think I was here 3 years ago. It was my first one. And there's a lot of, in the Western world, there's a lot of information that not necessarily maps to what goes on to experience, traveling. And when I got here, it was exactly that. There was just a profound, the first set of speakers, it was like, it was just doctors and people, highly educated men, women, everybody. It was just very, it wasn't like we're trying to get there. It was literally about 50-50, and it was pretty incredible to see. So, yeah.
And Lance, I want to stay with you for a second. Which evolution, not just the evolution, the positive evolution for women, but which evolution in terms of attackers and their capabilities are you seeing in the last 3 to 5 years that you would consider the most disruptive?
I think now that we've talked about, like earlier, the COM meets Russia, nation state and capabilities there, you add in LLMs, AI, it's like script kiddies now can do some extremely dangerous things and not even understand the level of danger that goes on there, because it can write code in seconds, it can write any tool that it needs to. We saw recently with Anthropic, they had an APT type of attack where it was an 80-20, 80% AI, 20% human-driven. That's been a massive change. But also on the other side of it, it's, defending against that is also going to be a massive change. So the AI's kind of become the great equalizer in some aspects, where it's not like uneven. It's just we have to get past data leaks and concerns there in banks and finance to defend ourselves at that speed, which there are ways to do so. But that's one of the shifts that I would say is game-changing at this point. So, yeah.
Lance, can I follow up real quick on that? Sure. So you see it from the adversarial perspective that LLMs are being used for evil. Do you see an equal side on corporate America actually using LLMs for good to defend against, or is it still trickling a little bit?
I'd say yes, because we do it, not to promote just us, but our job is to help defend some and do very special ops for certain situations, usually while they're being under attack. And honestly, I'm very thankful for the fact that agents can pretty much emulate an entire team as you need, just in case you only have one or two people on the weekend, but there's an emergency going on. We were able to write code versus spending $10,000 on some piece of software that might work in this scenario and go through a purchase order and everything like that. I'm like, all right, I got to scan 80 systems, write me PowerShell, very quickly. We still have someone inside this network, do it stealth-like. We had another case, we had an insider threat, and we were able to emulate the script code to look like their software and fully get the drive across the network to do forensics on, right? So yeah. It's been game-changing. I don't know if other companies are using it at the level that we have been, but sometimes we get called because we can, whereas some of the bigger companies I think are still dealing with the regulations and how do we deal with all of these other problems with AI, because they're not problematic, but they're challenging. Yeah. So, yeah.
I see a lot of innovation in using AI for defense. And different companies on the different stages of the journey. One challenge is a lot of companies facing is security data isn't quite set up natively for AI, right? You need to really transform the data, clean it up, but the ETL data pipeline has to be there for AI to be effective. So a lot of people are on that journey. But I think I'm very excited to see where security is going to go with AI.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to touch on what she's saying. I don't think it's just security doesn't have their data cleaned up. I think businesses as a whole, are finding, hey, they want to do an AI project, but to go ahead and do that, you actually have to have data.
Security has a lot of event data. The event data specifically, it's different formats. So.
And I mean, and I do think that, teams now, CISOs and their teams are looking at, whether they like it or not, the vendors that they have in their stack are implementing AI. And so you're going to have to go ahead and get comfortable with using that and with the new data sets that are being driven. And then I also think, at the same time, the business itself is using AI. We used to be worried about shadow IT, but you also are now worried about shadow AI as well, because you don't know which AI apps and stuff like that are being used by which teams and which departments. And so what you're finding out with CISOs is that we are having to get comfortable with it for ourselves, for our teams, because it changes, everything from policy to your frameworks to what you've got in your stack and how you're working with your vendors and the data that you're driven and where it's stored at and how it's being used. But then there's also changes within the business itself because they are implementing it. Legal wants to use it to look at contracts. Procurement wants to use it. And so the question you come down to now is, now all of a sudden you're looking at new startups because you're like, okay, I need to monitor this. And I need to figure out how I'm going to enforce policy and enforce guardrails on this. And a lot of these companies that help you do that are new.
So can I ask, did you want to add
I was going to say that one of my friends is a CISO, and they did a monitoring of their network, and they found like hundreds of MCP servers they didn't know about. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And some of them are open to the public. Like on the internet, people can access, and this MCP server is connecting to their back-end data, right? So that's
and not just the AI piece. You've also got to make sure that you tabletop it as well. So we actually tabletopped just this last summer when I was at SoftBank. We tabletopped a shadow AI issue, and it ended up becoming a whole big business continuity issue because the app was being used by one of the deals teams, for doing projections and stuff. And we purposely kicked off the whole thing by, hey, there's an article or a post on Reddit, and it looks like that's our financial data. How did that happen? And then that kicked off the whole tabletop, and it started bringing people in, and we started realizing, oh, there's going to be a whole new flow here. There needs to be a whole new playbook on how we're going to deal with AI threats. And we should be doing that now.
Yeah, and you should involve your board in your tabletop as well. So when is the right time to bring the board of directors in so that they are aware of what's happening and what they should be doing, if anything?
So if I could just go over to you, Ricardo, for just a second. Okay. So we were talking about before that there might be a sort of extinction level event. What's the thing that's been super defining in terms of incidents and that we've seen recently, but also what are we worried about for incidents that are coming up?
I think Lance started to hit on it with Anthropic. Again, you used to need a whole army of threat actors to be able to exploit an organization. Now you can do it in minutes, hours, and be a lot more sophisticated behind that. I think initially I was scared with, what was it, the Orion, someone help me with the name, the Orion supply chain attack. SolarWinds, how could I forget that? How could I forget that? Yep. So that literally changed the landscape on how to get into organizations, poisoning, a trusted third-party vendor. It's like, wow, nothing could get crazier than this. And now we're at a point where AI is literally taking over environments very quickly. So I think an AI to AI Skynet type of battle is going to be that doomsday scenario. Yeah. I think we're still far away, but people like Gary and others, as long as we can adopt this type of AI to counterattack evil AI, I think we're in a much better shape.
I would love an AI death match.
I know.
Actually, ironically,
that would be awesome.
I don't want to over-promote my technical talk is AI versus AI. Yeah. It's literally a war game.
Well, we saw that a little bit with the DARPA AICC, so the AI Cyber Challenge. Yeah. However, there is something I want to actually point out. So to your point, like SolarWinds, we now see Tim Brown has been let go. What type of turning point do you think this represents for CISOs? Because it was clearly a turning point when he was being prosecuted by the Securities and Exchange Commission.
It's good that the SEC came to the right mind and is not holding him responsible for this whole huge chain of events that obviously was the executive team and a lot more people involved than just the CISO. With that said, I don't think that there's any CISO that still isn't paranoid, that still isn't worried that they're being backed by their board, that they have, their director's insurance, that they have a, you have the DNR insurance, but you also, cover, an umbrella policy, and you're still paranoid about, all right, I want to make sure I have this discussion with the CTO or the CEO and it's verbal. When I get back to my desk, I'm still going to go ahead and send an email to them to summarize what we just discussed, just so I have it in writing. I don't think there's any of us that's not doing something like that because we are worried about that.
It's a tough job, let's face it. I don't know why anybody wants to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that being said, there's still quite a few of us around.
Absolutely. It's a fun and exciting job.
It
can
is.
It can be
It is.
depressing and sad 50% of the time, but the other part is absolutely amazing. You get to see the craziest stuff you could never imagine from a cybersecurity perspective. Yeah, there's the liability, there's all that whole 9 yards. But what other job can you see from the very low supply chain attack to some crazy insider threat with someone shooting a laser to Mars or some crazy stuff like that? Come on, it's the life of a CISO. It's never dull or boring, except when
never
you're
dull.
doing finance and HR and that type of
even
stuff.
when
The
you're-
rest is awesome.
I mean, even when you're doing incident response, there's times where you're like, okay, I hate it that they broke into our networks, but at the same time, you're like, this is really cool the way they did this.
The incident
putting the
response
puzzle.
is fun. When you don't have incidents, when you let's sit around, twiddle your thumbs.
Now, if I'm not having incidents, I'm worried because
That's right.
I know
That's right.
something,
Yeah.
I missed something.
What aren't you
Yeah.
seeing? Yeah.
Yeah.
What aren't
You know, security people are they're like ER doctors. They want trauma.
Spoken from someone that's not a CISO. How's your ivory tower?
Well, unfortunately, with every incident, I mean, let's be honest, as a CISO, at least, I mean, like, the things that have changed and shifted is the board backing, but they're also at risk. Every time there's an incident for their job, so it's not, it's probably a paradox, right, where you guys are going through where it's like, oh, this is like awesome, like you said, but also like, I hope we solve this very quickly.
But,
It's an interesting thing for me to go from a sort of a security person to sitting on boards. And I remember my first board, when I joined the board, the rest of the board of directors came to me and said, that cybersecurity thing, when is the end? It's like, when are we going to be good?
Yeah.
I'm like, we're never going to be like 100% secure. And they were like, just like, oh, this is like, we don't understand this. So we need to do a better job of communicating and educating still. I think.
Still, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what if that's still the thing, because that's kind of surprising, we're still talking about educating boards, right?
Yeah.
We've been talking about it for quite a while.
But I think you're always going to be educating them
Yeah.
at one point or another just because the threats
Sure.
and the risks change. The
Yes.
company itself will change and do different things. They'll go into different markets. They're going to go ahead and have big, large
Yes.
projects.
But
And
you're not educating them on the point that cybersecurity is a never done kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the question is, what's the biggest shift in terms of technology or attacker defender tactics that we actually do need to educate the board on?
I think one of the biggest things that I'm doing, in fact, I was chatting about that back there now, is I'm being, I sit on boards and advise boards, and in my new role at Halcyon, I actually get called in to talk to boards, and I'm educating them on how ransomware has shifted and how it's changed. And and obviously AI is being used by the bad guys just as it's being used by the good guys. And helping them, and I think the biggest thing, I spend a lot of time helping them understand is, all right, you spend money and resources to build something to make sure that the company is secure, but it's a continuous process. It isn't like it's going to stay like that forever. It's the same thing like, when you buy a car, you go ahead and you got to do maintenance on the car, and you buy insurance in case, you're going to have an accident or something happens to the car, and you've got to continuously maintain it and put gas in it so that you can go ahead or charge it, so that you can go ahead and drive it and be able to go places. Well, your security program's the same thing. It's the care and feeding of it and the managing of it, and you just have to live with the fact that you're never going to have 100%. But you can do extremely well with 80%, and be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And it's helping them be comfortable with the fact that you're already accepting risk when you're trading and when you're doing M&A, and you're already accepting different types of risk, from a business perspective. This is just another type of business risk.
So let's talk about that for a second. So risk is always a coverage issue versus a budget issue. So how do you feel like you make the best decisions for the next couple of years in terms of the budget?
Couple of years. Like 18 months best.
Yeah.
I think it's really going back to tried and true. Your risk register, understanding what the business objectives are and how the controls align to what they're working on, and not just shooting from the hip. Again, yes, AI, you have these dynamic threats. They will be the outliers of your security program, but you should always have that traditional foundation that aligns to the goals of the business and then you identify where those gaps are, and you prioritize those based on risk, funding, time, complexity, and effort. It's a very tried and true method that financial organizations use. Or CFO, you, again, going back to that communication, speak their language, talk about risk tolerance. What's their risk appetite to invest in crazy AI attacking laser beams? I mean, pick and choose your battles, but understand where that 80 to 85% of your budget should go, and it should trajectory go in that way.
Yeah. And do you guys use things like the current attacker success rates on specific things to motivate those budget decisions, or do you feel more comfortable looking at what do I have to defend and who do I have to defend it from?
I personally hate FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Sure.
I mean, you can get a quick win here or there for it, but you need to instill trust, or the board has to instill trust with you. Executive management has to understand how your programs run. If you're saying, oh, I had 500 million attacks this month, is that good? Is that bad? Why should I care? Being able to change that conversation into how is that helping us secure the organization or improving the maturity of the program as a whole?
And Lance, maybe I could ask you, is there things that you're seeing at 22-1B?
Yeah, actually, so we do a lot of red teaming, and it ends up in the boardroom afterwards, right? And one of the things that the first time I did that where it was actually in the boardroom was kind of an amazing moment, because most of the red team problems what it does is it says, you need to hire more in these areas. Like you might need an incident response team, or you need this and this, and it's just really kind of this thing. And usually there's a lot of companies that do red teams, and they'll go, all right, here's all the crazy bad news. And I said, this is good news. You guys can start looking at like how to hire through this, because you need this. Basically, an example was we were able to see their JIRA and them trying to see us, and they couldn't really see us. And we're like, well, if you have 80 tickets and only 10 people working on that on a 9,000 person company, you should hire more on that area, and here's the areas. And so we were in the boardroom giving them using a red team as a strong justification, not that you did poorly, it's that you could do well if you can support the actual attacks that come in, right? So that's been very successful in that way. It's like, we try to tell them also the things they're already doing well, right? What direction you keep going in, because a lot of times, you hire some consultancy and they'll go, oh, here's all the bad things. But I'm like, actually, is my 2FA in the right direction? How's my OAuth? Things like that. That's just as important. That progress is just as important, so that people don't switch out and don't keep focus on the good stuff. And then they can even model what they did good there and say, are there things that apply in these other areas? Maybe we just need more attention here, or more staff here, more resources, more.
I love that approach.
I totally agree with that. I think if the security programs is chasing threat du jour, then you never get to a steady state, right? So I always tell my CISO to bring in the steady state of the security program, the maturity assessment, and I want them to show there's improvement on certain aspects of it. But from time to time, you have a change factor, such as AI, right? AI brings in new attack surface. Then you have to say, okay, this quarter we're going to talk a little bit about how to deal with that as a new thing to report to the board, but doesn't lose sight of the steady state of the security program.
Yeah. And Chenxi, can I ask you a follow-up question? Like, do you see this reflected in investment decisions? Is this also the way that Silicon Valley is looking at companies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in early stage companies, we don't look at security program maturity as much, because you just don't have that much sort of a focus on it. But we look at how the buyer's behavior change, right? So we look at how your company is putting emphasis on certain things, and where's the gaps, and then we invest in the gaps.
Yeah, and what kind of companies are like up and coming that you think we should invest in?
Well, right now is a lot about AI security, right? We just had 2 exits in our fund on AI security, and the next frontier is agentic security.
Do you want to add to the agentic security?
Like I said, when I was building, again, I just changed. Where I'm at now 3 months ago. Before that, I was, when I was at SoftBank, we were heavily involved with, because my team had been building, AI within the security program for like the last 3 years. And the agentic, the agent piece was becoming really, really big for us. And in the last 6 months, I probably looked at a dozen plus companies around doing security for the enterprise. So we're monitoring to see what different AI tools were being used, making sure people were following policy and staying within the guidelines, within the guide rails and the trainings and stuff that we had provided. And then from the agentic piece, we were looking at, and I honestly, to me, feel that all CISOs are going to have agentic agents operating within their programs, within their teams. If they don't have them now, they're easily going to have them within the next 6 to 12 months. So you're going to basically have digital employees that are operating within your teams. And so a lot of the agentic stuff that I was seeing that we were looking at were tools that I could go ahead and see the agents, see how they were provisioned, see what permissions they had, and be able to see them across the enterprise, what they were doing, what data that they were touching, to make sure that they were provisioned correctly.
You can do that. You can do that like from every agent point of view.
There was a couple of companies that could.
Yeah, it's very early though.
Yeah. And in fact, the dozen companies I looked at, there was only 2, actually there were 3 that were mature enough. 2 of them have since been acquired. 2 of them from SentinelOne and Palo Alto, and then 1 has not been acquired yet, but it's probably any day now.
So I want to have a follow-up question to that, because you mentioned you see them as like, an additional person in your team, these agents. So how do you look at agentic misalignment? How do you look at agents as if they were an insider threat?
Well, actually, we had a discussion.
I have something to say too, but go ahead.
I had a big discussion on this where we were talking about social engineering being, one of the major parts dealing with like ransomware attacks. And we were talking about, if you have agentic agents or these agentic, basically employees within your teams, what's social engineering going to look like with them? Because it's going to happen.
Easily.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, it'd be fascinating to go.
But
Injection
if
is
you have
social
a
engineering.
human employee organization, humans make mistakes too,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So how do you train humans? And you have to adapt to the same method or maybe slightly different method to agentic employees. They make mistakes too. The question is, how do you deal with the mistakes and how do you train them to make mistakes less in the future?
Here's an interesting provocative thing we don't have to solve today is, who owns that employee? Anthropic, OpenAI? Like, what happens? Because a lot of people are going to start handing the creds to these systems. And your question is, who's going to own the liability if that employee goes too fast and breaks things, right? And right now, it's too early, but it's just a very valid concern right now.
And I think what it's going to do is it's going to drive more startups that you're going to be looking at.
It will, I think the governance liability side, like human judgment adding on top of agentic sort of ecosystem and putting the legal guardrail on top is where we're going.
It's actually really interesting because I think that this conversation about how do we actually use this, it's one thing when we deploy frontier models to do this agentic flow, it's something else when companies start rolling their own. And I think the question we're going to have to ask ourselves is, just like cryptography, do we think we should use standardized things, or are we comfortable with people rolling their own?
So there's a project I wrote recently, open source on purpose, and it's called Private AI, because I realized I don't think privacy and transparency can be closed source for banks and for people who need to worry about the data leaks. So the biggest problem was, if I'm doing a red team and I am using AI, or if I'm doing some other GitHub work, but I have credentials, I have PII data, I have customer data, I have this, I don't want to send it to Anthropic. And let's be honest, between Google, Anthropic, and OpenAI, those are the 3 players that most agentics are going to succeed very well at, right? So what do I do? And we had a Docker box and we put it in the middle, and it basically, you can either do it like very hand jam, or it will use a Presidio model and track it. But the challenge right now is that the companies that we should invest in, if they're going to do transparency, privacy, all these regulations, it's almost going to be like proxy boxes that kind of do this. There's got to be absolute transparency that the data never went to that other side and synthetically was changed.
I think proxy boxes won't do for the future, because you've got the agents, and in the proxies, typically it's just between the human and the LM. And in the future, when you have a mesh of agents, where do you put the proxy, right?
Oh, just at the endpoint, yeah, at the where all the firewall going out, the
Right.
egress, yeah.
But I think to your question about whether you roll your own model versus using a large language model by Anthropic or OpenAI, it's a really interesting question. But we are in the wild, wild west right now, right? In the sort of the journey we're on. A lot of companies saying, "Oh, we want to roll your own because I don't want to send my data to the cloud," but you don't have the right people. Even if you have an open weight, GPUs you can get by money, but even if you have an open weight model, you don't have the right people to looking at the model to making sure it doesn't have a backdoor, it's doing the right thing. And how do you make, I would rather be more comfortable using a model in the cloud.
You're going to
So I
use
have a
AI
follow-up.
to look at other AI.
So I have a
is what it's
follow-up
gonna be.
question to both
But
of
it's
you.
turtle all the way down.
Yeah.
Right?
So the follow-up question is, Chenxi was recently in Europe. You were doing a tour. How do you feel about sovereignty in this specific case, like using Mistral instead of the other models?
Or not just Mistral.
Yeah.
I was in Finland, I was in Estonia. They are building a whole tech stack to be separate from the US because they realize they can't rely on the US specifically. So in the future, they have to have their own cloud, have their own model, have their own, endpoint or not. So that's happening, and you see the entire world. We see China's off on its own. Europe is creating their own tech stack, and I think Saudi is trying to be the tech center for GCC. So we are looking at a segregated world.
Reminds me of the space race, in the 60s. Everybody was making their own space shuttles and trying to get there first,
The pendulum will swing back at some point.
Yeah, and can I ask you, Ricardo, because Kraft Heinz is a multinational, how do you deal with these kinds of questions in the multinational context with all of these changes?
Heavy size, how I begin. And it's extreme data localization. We've had this with China's cybersecurity law for quite some time. India's had their own. We really need to focus on working with a lot of our SaaS providers to make sure that they can provide the access within those specific regions. IaaS the same. Like, for example, we operate in China. We specifically Azure. We use I think it's the China Telecom runs the Azure in that region, and we just change the processes according to that local region. Yes, it's not great. You always want your single pane of glass where your policies just transcend across the board, but those days are going away. Infrastructure code does make it a lot easier to be able to manage these fragmented systems, but that archaic view is like, I want this beautiful single pane of glass. It's gone. Just give it up.
So the final question, so 30 seconds. If we were to reunite this panel in 5 years from now, right? We talked a lot about AI and models. What do you think will say, all of us, change the most in threats, in technology, and maybe even in Black Hat MEA itself? Go ahead, Lance. You want to kick us off?
I think that we would probably laugh at about how much has changed. I can't actually predict 5 years because the disruption's so heavily right now that I can't imagine. It used to be easier, right? You could kind of see it coming. With AI, it's still, like you said, the wild, wild west. I think what we'll be talking about is how well did we do our orchestration across identity, cloud management, AI systems, and all of this stuff, and that mastery there, and then also how are people working now with all of the AI in play, and have their jobs changed and all these things. So, but it's so unpredictable at this point, So.
I think 5 years from now, none of us will be on stage. We'll have our agents will be here talking.
I'll have the Lance robot.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of us will be like, can you imagine 5 years ago we were saying this about AI? What were we thinking?
Yep.
CISOs will still not be able to talk to the business right.
And on that
I'm a realist. I'm a realist.
He's a pessimist.
I hear this. But, on that very positive note, I hope very much that we do see each other in the flesh 5 years from now, and that we're really happy with the incredible success at Black Hat MEA, and that we see even more positive things, like more women in the CTF, and a safe and secure future for AI. With that, thank you so much for joining on the stage today. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.